Hi everyone. Now let's take a look on how to create a web application or an application service. Let me just move on to the Azure Portal. We are looking at the specific service of the application services. We are going to find this into the web category. We can click on that and we should see the list of the application services that we already have it. In this case, let's try to create a new one. So I'm going to click on add. That will open for us the deployment blade for the web application. The first thing that we need to configure will be the application name that it is going to be also the HTTP for my web application instance. In this case, talking about the web applications, we are using the platform as a service deployment model. So in this case, we don't need to take care of the infrastructure in the back. We just need to configure some settings that represents the instance, and we are just focusing basically into the application. We can, once that we have the instance, we can upload our custom application and put it into this new instance and see how it's going to perform. Now let's try to apply a name for this web application. Let's try with I don't know, application for video, for example. Okay, and or default domain for application services in Azure, it's that azurewebsites.net. So that will be my URL for my web application. If you can see the green check here, that means that that name is available. This name needs to be unique globally. Now, the next option will be to select a subscription. I am only managing one, so I'm going to leave the default. If you are managing multiple ones, then you need to choose the subscription that you want to use for this specific resource. Now I have an option to create a new resource group with this application service or using an existing. I'm okay creating a new one, and Azure is trying to apply the same name for the resource group as with the web application name. So I'm okay with that, but you can just provide any other name. In this case, this name should be unique under your subscription. Now, the next thing that we need to choose will be the operating system that we want to use in the host for this specific instance. And we have two options. We can pick for Windows operating system or Linux operating system. I'm okay with the default one, with Windows one, and the next option would be the publish method. By default, it's using code if I'm using Visual Studio, Team Foundation Server, or something like that. Then the default option would be the code, or if you want to deploy a Docker image, then we can switch to that. But in that case, we need to point to our repository and apply the name of the image that we want to use. So I'm okay with the defaults. I'm going to use code for that. And now comes the part of the application service. Now, uh, there is a very close relationship between the application service and the application service plan. There is actually two different resources, but uh, always an application service required an application service plan. And why is that? Because the application service plan is basically the resources that your application service is going to use. In other words, the uh, power or the resources that our instance is going to use. Like for example, the how many virtual CPU cores, the amount of RAM, the maximum storage space that we can use with this application service, and the location is also configured at the application service plan level. So in this case, Azure is trying to create a new application service plan for me. But if I have another one application service, I can pick it from the list here. And by picking another application service plan from the list, that means that I can share the same application service plan with different application services instances if I'm using one that came from the production pricing tier, because we are going to find that there is three pricing tiers, three main pricing tiers for the application services. We are going to find the basic or free, and that came with limitations that we cannot use it to host in many application instances. And we will find the production one, and we are going to find the isolated. That the isolated, it's a premium one, and it is going to picking the isolated is using actually like the premium feature of the application service. And actually it receives a different name. It's the application service environment, or ASE. So, but the functionality in the back, it's pretty similar. The difference is that we can scale up to more instances. We can allocate more power to that application service environment. We're going to receive a dedicated VNet, dedicated infrastructure. And so now let's take a look at the application service plan configuration. We can see there that Azure is recommending me using the APP service. This will be an S1 pricing tier, but let's take a look at the options that we have when we want to create a new application service plan. I'm going to click on create a new, and that will open the blade for the configuration of the application service plan. So here I need to apply a name for that application service plan. This name, it's not a URL, so we can apply any name under our subscription level. So I'm going to uh, provide a name application service plan 1, for example, and see that name is okay. If I can see the green check, then the location will be basically selecting a region or a data center into a specific place where we are going to create this web application instance. Let's say that I'm picking the West US location, and then comes the option for the pricing tier. Here, by clicking on the options, we are going to see the three different categories of the pricing tier: development, developing and testing, production, and isolate. Now, for each of the three types of main pricing tiers, we are going to find multiple individual pricing tiers. Uh, the F1, for example, D1, V1, V2, V3, and we can see the included features here if we take a look at the bottom of the page, and also the included hardware that we can use with that. And we can see that if we switch to a different one, then we can see that we can increase the amount of features that we can use, and also increase the features like the amount of storage. We can just receive up to 10 gigabytes of this storage for our web application. We can apply custom domains, apply SSL certificates, and manually scale up to 3 instances. Now, if we take a look at the production one, we're going to find more sizes from the S, S1, S2, S3, or the P pricing tiers: P1, P2, P3, or P1 version 2, P1, P2 version 2, or P3 version 3. Here we can see the amount of ACUs, that is basically how Azure is going to charge us for the consumption of this application service. Taking a look at the ACUs, that is basically a combination of the power of the resources that we are allocating with this pricing tier. And we can see that this is equivalent to an A series compute equivalent. If we take a look at the table of the virtual machine sizes in Azure, we are going to see that the sizes of the virtual machines are going to be A series, D series, like in this case. So this is the equivalency that In this case, application services is managing by comparing between the application services and the VM. So we are going to find that, okay, if I pick this a specific pricing tier, I'm just basically using a DV2 series of a virtual machine. But here we are not managing a virtual machine because we are using platform as a service. Now, if we scroll a little bit down, we are going to see that we have more included features comparing with the free or development and testing. And we can see that we have the same features like the one that came with the other option, custom domains, SSL certificates. But here you can see that there is a change. Instead of manually scale and up to 3 instances, we can auto scale up to 20 instances. By auto scaling, we can configure it for the application services to with rules. We can configure it with rules, and those rules are going to basically monitoring the resources utilization of the application service or the instance. And in case that they that monitoring configuration finds that the that you reach a specific condition, the same application service plan or the same application service can auto scale and create more instances to host that specific load that you are receiving into a specific period. Here we can find another included feature that is the staging slot. With the staging slot, we can manage multiple versions of the same application. When we are trying to upgrade to a new version instead of publishing directly to production slot, we can just create up to 20, and we are basically receiving a new or an independent instance than comparing that the production one, and we can apply all the tests that we need. Once that we are happy with the results of the test, we can swap the slots. We can move the upgrade to be in the production slot, and after we apply all the tests, we can move it very quickly without experiencing downtime. Another included feature will be to configure daily backups. Those daily backups will be for your application service configuration, for your application content, and if there is some dependencies with your web application, like a database or something like that, you can configure, you can include into the backups that database. Traffic Manager, here we can configure Traffic Manager. It is like a load balancer for your web application instance. Basically, with a Traffic Manager, we can configure multiple endpoints into multiple locations, and we can distribute the load by deploying multiple web application instances in different regions, and the Traffic Manager will apply all the internal mechanisms to based on the options that we configure, manage the traffic and just maybe send the traffic that came from a different location to the closest endpoint to that specific client request. And here in the included hardware, we are going to see that Azure Compute Units, or ACUs. Uh, we are going to use some memory per instance, and we can have up to, like in this case, 250 gigabytes for the storage or for the content of our application service plan. We can see that there will be a small change when we pick a different pricing tier from the same category, from the production one. The difference can be, for example, the amount of instances, the amount of staging slots, uh, the amount or how many times you can take daily backups, and also the maximum space of the storage. Now, let's pick, for example, the simple one from the S1. But first, let me just take an overview of the isolated pricing tier. Here, there will be a big difference here because the isolated one is you are going to use a dedicated instance for you. And let's take a look at the included features. We are receiving a single tenant system. We are receiving an isolated network, an isolated VNet with that. We are receiving a private application access, and we are receiving an internal load balancer for that. and we can scale to a large number of instances in this, like up to 100 instances. We have the possibility to configure a traffic manager here too, and basically the pricing tiers for the isolated category, we are just receiving three options. These three options are going to be different in the resources that are going to use. 210 ACUs or Azure Compute Units, 420 for the i2, and 840 for the i3. 3.5 gigabytes of memory for the i1, 7 gigabytes of memory for the i2, and 14 gigabytes of memory for the i3. All of the three pricing tiers are going to use an equivalent of a DV2 series of the compute, or an equivalent of the virtual machine, and you can see the estimated pricing for each of the three options. Now let's take a look at the production. The production will be the most common one, and that include most of the features to just have a production application service. And I'm going to use the S1, the most basic one of the production one. I can click on apply, and now this finished the configuration of my application service plan. Remember that the application service plan has all the resources that we are going to use with this web application. So by picking an application service plan from the production pricing tier, that means that I can reuse this application service plan with multiple application service instances. But by doing that, remember that you are sharing the resources. You are using just a single application service plan, and all the resources that you are receiving with our application service plan are going to be shared into the multiple individual web applications that you pick. So you can face some performance issues by doing that, because you can host more than one application service. The good side for that is that you can, for example, um, pay just for one application service plan and hosting more than one application service instance. And you can just apply that to for testing, for example, see how it's going to perform, and then if you choose it, you can just put it into a different application service plan, into a dedicated one, or scaling up to another pricing tier, or move on to an application service environment if you require that. Now, the next option will be the application insights. This came by default with your application service, but you can disable that. Application insights is basically another resource that is going to be deployed with your same application service deployment, and that is a kind of a service that it's going to help you monitoring the performance of your application service by taking a deeper look of more metrics that you are receiving, and see how your application instance is performing. But if you don't want to use this service, or if you don't want to deploy this resource, you can switch to disable, and then you are this specific resource is not going to be deployed with your web application. Finally, I can click on create. If everything is okay, this will run a final validation. If all my configuration is correct, I should see that the deployment is going to start. Now the deployment of web application is going to take between 2 minutes or something like that. I already have another one, another application service, so I can click on that and we can take a look at the options that we are receiving. Basically, taking an overview of the